Okay, I may start.
Sure.
Good evening, colleagues. And good evening, colleagues. I wonder if I am visible.
Naledi, are you still struggling to use these things?
No, I'm using two devices. Good evening, colleagues, students, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to SAAPAM's 2025 Post-SONA Reflections. This event is an annual event hosted by SAAPAM, which aims to take stock of the president's pronouncements and priorities for the new year. I would like to welcome all of the audience or everyone in the audience this evening, but in particular, I would like to extend my welcome to our speakers this evening who will be leading the conversation. We are joined by, as they appear, colleagues on the poster this evening, Mr. Sello Sitholo, who is the Deputy Minister of Water and Sanitation, Ms. Karabo, Deputy Executive Director of NYDA, you will correct me if I have made a mistake, and Mr. Musi Maimane, who is an MP in our parliament. And I would like to tender an apology for Ms. Malaika Mahlatsi, who will unfortunately not be able to join us this evening. She has been held up in another engagement. Before we start, colleagues, I would just like to give some housekeeping rules. As we proceed with this discussion, it's going to be roughly a 30-minute discussion. And what I would like to request is for our speakers to go first. And then after our speakers, as they are giving their pronouncements, as they are providing us with their reflections, for you to perhaps, for the audience to engage with us through either typing in our respective platforms. You can either type in your question through the chat box, and then we will go back to them afterwards. I am going to give my speakers or our thought leaders this evening roughly 7 minutes to give us their reflections on the SONA. This is just for time, in order for us to keep time and to have an engaged dialogue which can continue beyond one question. The way in which I would like for us to proceed once more is in the order in which they appear on the poster. So that is starting with Mr. Sello, Ms. Karabo, and then Mr. Maimane. Colleagues, as we start, may you please give us a brief reflection of your takeaways or a brief reflection of the SONA 2025, starting with you, Mr. Sitholo.
Good evening, colleagues. Good evening to my older brother, Mr. Maimane. Good evening to my friend and colleague, Dr. Molepo. Thank you for the opportunity and for the invite. It's always a pleasure to be able to just look at the points of interest that came up from the State of the Nation address. Of course, we know what the key three issues are in terms of economic growth, job creation, and tackling poverty. But for me personally, you would have heard there were quite a number of, there was a reform that was highlighted by the president that relates to water. And perhaps I want to stick to that because in my view, there is just certain elements about water that South Africans do not appreciate. And because of that, we're going to find ourselves in a situation where we've got a water crisis that is similar to the Eskom load shedding. Perhaps let me start by saying this. Every challenge that we have in this country that relates to water and sanitation has got municipalities at the forefront of those challenges. Simply because municipalities, as mandated by the Constitution, are responsible for the reticulation of water and sanitation services to communities. There are certain, of course, aspects that the National Department of Water and Sanitation is responsible for from a regulation point of view, as well as a management of the water resources concerned. The biggest issue that we have here is South Africa is one of 30 countries that is water scarce. Secondly, we have got collapsing water and sanitation infrastructure at municipal level. But most importantly, and something that is not spoken about, and I don't think that if I don't put in the work, it will not be spoken about, is the pollution of our water resources. The very same water resources that are supposed to be at the forefront of ensuring water security, availability, and so forth and so on in South Africa. We have deeply polluted water resources. These may be rivers and dams across the country, in particular in Gauteng, where municipalities in Gauteng combined are discharging over 160 million liters of raw sewage per day into our water resources. This is important for us to note as South Africans, particularly because of the state that we are in terms of water. You'd recall that we are getting water from Lesotho via the Lesotho Highlands Tunnel. That is, of course, driven by our entity, the Trans-Caledon Tunnel Authority, TCTA, which, of course, will be collapsed as part of the approved act, the National Water Resource Infrastructure entity. So TCTA will be forming now, will no longer be in existence. The problem is that the water that we get from Lesotho is water that could be considered, and if you go to the tunnel and look at the water, could be considered ready to drink water. We're spending millions per month in terms of royalties to the Lesotho government, only for that water to be able to come through and integrate within the integrated Vaal River system and find deeply polluted water. The value chain is like this. Where there is a deeply polluted water resource, such as the Vaal River, for example, the abstraction point of rainwater, that means is that deeply polluted raw water means that it will cost more to treat to potable standards. When it costs more to treat to potable standards, it means that those that purchase it in bulk or that buy it in bulk, municipalities, let's say Johannesburg, Tshwane, and so forth, will purchase it at a higher price. And who suffers at the end of the day? The consumer. But the tragedy in all of this is that over 40% of the water that is treated to potable standard is lost to the ground due to leaks, illegal connections, collapsing infrastructure, and all the other issues that we know at a local level. This is important to mention because polluted water resources also contribute negatively to agriculture, contributes negatively to the tourism sector, contributes negatively to the possibility of communities drinking contaminated water, as was the case in Hammanskraal. Now, you cannot build an economy without water. You cannot build an economy without reliable supply of electricity. And I think that if we are to talk about how we're going to get water secure in South Africa, we need to have an honest conversation about the state of municipalities in our country and their ability to discharge their responsibility in as far as water and sanitation services are concerned, or water services are concerned. The reforms that the president announced during SONA as it relates to water will only materialize once municipalities begin a ring-fencing process of their budgets towards water services. And because this is not happening, and because we really haven't, in my view, reached a crisis level, people, South Africans in particular, have got no appreciation of the extent to which pollution is actually going to lead us to a water crisis in this country. And I wanted to start off with those points so that I can show you the correlation between, or the vicious cycle, really, that this particular situation has created in our country. There's a vicious cycle simply because we are more concerned about the end product. I always say the end of the value chain, and we don't really care about the beginning of the value chain. South Africans do not protest for sewer that is running on the streets or polluting water resources, but they will protest if they do not have water for an extended period of time. But the very same sewage that is contaminating our water resources or polluting our water resources will eventually result in the lack of availability of water. So we've increased access in terms of the Blue Drop report, but that's access is limited by reliability, because people may very well have taps in their yards, but there will be no water that is coming out. So that's a reliability factor. So I wanted to start my conversation in that fashion and highlight what my takeaway was from the State of the Nation address, given the position that I hold, given the responsibility that we have as a Department of Water and Sanitation in securing our water resources. That also, of course, plays into the key aspects of economic growth, job creation, and tackling poverty. So it's an issue that I'm passionate about. It's an issue that I will speak about over and over and over again, because my experience over the past 8 months is that there isn't an appreciation of the crisis that in as far as the pollution of our water resources. And any other issue, of course, is important. But for me, water becomes the #1 key priority. And I think that is very important for us to be able to acknowledge and really consider having an in-depth discussion in and around this issue. Thank you so much, Naledi.
Thank you so much, Deputy Minister. You touched on 3 very important points there: the pollution of water resources, the reform in the municipality, which is central to the challenges that we are facing with the water, but also the collapsing water infrastructure, which we can compare or is comparable to the challenges that we've had with the collapse of Eskom. And I think we are very interested to hear, as we continue on with the dialogue, more of your thoughts on how these priorities will shape the key priorities or the key strategic priorities highlighted by the President, those of inclusive growth, job creation, the reduction in poverty, and so forth. As we proceed, I'd like to invite Ms. Mohale to give us her thoughts and reflections on the State of the Nation 2025. Colleagues, when you see me appear on the screen, it means that your time is up. Thank you, Ms. Karabo.
Thank you very much, moderator, for the opportunity just to give my input on the President's address this past week. And let me extend my appreciation to the leadership of SAAPAM for creating such a critical platform for us to be able to dialogue.
Sorry to interrupt.
Colleagues, are you able to hear me?
We can hear you. I'm asking whether you're able to have your camera on for the audience, please.
It's on. I think maybe just spotlight me. My camera is indeed on. Perhaps let's try to request the host just to spotlight me.
While they work on that, you may proceed. I'll take stock.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you. I was just extending my words of gratitude to the leadership of SAAPAM for affording us this critical platform to be able to reflect on some of the priority areas that the President would have reflected on this past few days, I mean last week, Thursday. But I think I want to start on this point. And I mean, you know, having been in the NYDA for a good 3 years and being a young person myself, you know, when we're listening to the President speaking, his opening remarks, it was very bold and very firm, you know, reassuring us that we're in charge of this country as a people, will not be bullied, we're resilient. And, you know, as a young person, you just had this moral regeneration and just had this hope that indeed, you know, the tide is definitely going to turn. Just hold on for me, colleagues. Prof is texting me. Prof, my camera is on.
No, it's not. Maybe may you just close it and open it again, please.
Okay. Are you able to see me?
No, but in the beginning we were able to see you. Please try it again.
The 2 people that appear on my side is Naledi and the DM on my screen. So I'm not sure. Yeah, I can see the DM. His camera is on. My camera is on. Maybe let me just show you what I see on my side, and perhaps those that are somewhat technologically advanced can be able to see.
I think we don't have to worry too much about it. We can continue on with the dialogue, maybe in the next round of discussions.
My camera is definitely on. I'm just not sure what could be happening on your side in terms of spotlighting me. Maybe remove Naledi from the spotlight and the DM and just try to see if you cannot be able to spotlight me. I think the DM is still on the spotlight. Okay, while we try sort that out, colleagues, Prof will just have to try and figure it out as we go on. I think I was just also bring back my 7 minutes, please, moderator. I was just making a reflection that, you know, when the president started speaking, he sounded very firm, you know, just giving a line of march that as a country will not be bullied, we're resilient. And, you know, that is the attitude that we were given by the president. I think as a young person, that gave us a lot of excitement, moral regeneration, and actually thinking that going into the state of the nation itself, you'll have this level of firmness permeating even when dealing with critical issues, especially issues that deal with young people. And I'm saying this because when you listen to the president's input on what is the plan for young people, it's similar things that have come out in the previous 2-3 years. And we're speaking about the presidential employment stimulus. You're speaking about the National Youth Service. You're speaking about all these other interventions, graduate schemes that are coming out of the State of the Nation. But the language is almost similar to what we have been hearing before, especially when it comes to the crisis of youth unemployment in South Africa. And I think for me, you know, I would have been expecting that, looking at how the youth unemployment rate has been progressing, and by progressing, we look at how it has been increasing steadily over the past few years. I mean, you know, the expanded definition from Statistics SA speaks about something above 60%, that you've got 60% of the youth of South Africa that are idling, that are not being productive in any economic sector or in any viable means. And I think for me, the biggest thing would have been me hearing the president calling for there to be some immediate and uninterrupted attention paid towards trying to resolve the socioeconomic conditions of young people. It's never a good sign when we have so many young people not doing anything in the country. It is a sign of disaster, but also it's a ticking time bomb for all of us. If we are worried about what is happening in different countries and as far as war is related, if you look at these young people who are soldiers, you know, you are then becoming very scared about the future of South Africa if we're not able to speedily resolve the challenges that the youth of South Africa face. And I think for me, that is the biggest thing that came out, that the president, although being very supportive and of course mentioning that we have a crisis of youth unemployment and literally youth development in South Africa, consistently saying this in his addresses for the past few years, for me the response does not match the lived realities of young people on the ground. And I think there needs to be a radical shift in how we put forth progressive interventions that are going to be able to change the tide when we look at the challenges that young people face, and also looking at how we're going to be getting young people into sectors that are very productive, very labor intensive, and also taking advantage of some of the areas that the president would have been looking at. I mean, for the longest of time, and I think I want to commend the president over this, I mean, for the longest of times, we have been as a country punting the question of beneficiation, and that came out quite clearly in the State of the Nation address, that South Africa needs to be able to reindustrialize so that we can be able to beneficiate the raw materials that we have in South Africa so that we can be able to create the much needed jobs and be able to respond rapidly to some of the socio-economic conditions and challenges that the people of South Africa face. So that for me also just came out on top, that the reindustrialization project, the beneficiation question is coming out on top, and that for me is a step in the right direction. There's also a conversation that is also quite important. I mean, if you look at economic indicators and as so far as to what load shedding would have done to the South African economy, us de-risking ourselves from load shedding and energy poverty is also a step in the right direction towards us trying to resolve some of the infrastructure, some of the economic challenges that we have in South Africa. But I think also just to reflect on, there was a question, and I think perhaps maybe this is an engagement that would need to have. I'm not in local government, but I mean, I was listening to the president speaking about how, you know, there's this new financial model that they are going to be presenting for municipalities. Sounds exciting, all well and good, but you're looking at the reports of the AG that speaks about municipalities that are non-functional, municipalities that cannot even manage their finances. And I'm wondering if the solution is congruent to the problem that we're facing in municipalities, and actually us trying to resolve those massive challenges, because you would understand, and I think the DM also spoke about the fact that, you know, water is life, and water is an important factor that we all need to consider. And all of those services happen at municipal level. All of these service delivery challenges that we're speaking about, most of them happen at municipal level. And I'm wondering if really the response in as so far as to the intervention that is presented in the State of the Nation address is going to be sufficient for us to be able to have a turnaround strategy for our municipalities, and us ensuring that we build you know, institutions that can be able to work for the people. And I think for me, part of the challenges that I think we need to be able to reflect on as we're busy discussing is really how we can be able to ensure that there is this turnaround strategy that is a bit more fast-paced, in as so far as to us trying to resolve the challenges that we are facing as people in South Africa, and really being able to say we cannot afford to have the Black majority and young people tinkering on the edges of economic activity instead of being active participants in the development trajectory of South Africa. Thank you very much. You're on mute, moderator.
Thank you for bringing that to my attention. I nearly went off, but I just wanted to thank you for your inputs as well, because as you were speaking, you know, I had it put a lump in my throat just considering and thinking about the challenges in which the youth of South Africa is facing. And one thing that you also touched upon, which is quite important, was how the president in himself is able to present to us, and you know, he is able to stimulate hope within us as a society, but sometimes this hope, this expectation, and this excitement is short-lived after the SONA, where we look at issues of implementation. I would like to now invite Mr. Maimane to speak to us about his reflections. But before you do, Mr. Maimane, I also wanted to mention that the common theme that I've heard from the Deputy Minister of Water and Ms. Mohale was this theme of unemployment, joblessness, but also the challenges in which these they are focused on, which is at local municipality. So here's your 7 minutes. Let us hear, please, your reflections on the State of the Nation 2025.
Thank you very much. I'll try and stick to the 7 minutes. Can everybody hear me? I hope you can. If you, maybe moderator, can I check with you? Can you hear me? Okay, if you can hear me, okay. Thank you so much, Naledi. First and foremost, I think let's understand the State of the Nation occurs within a particular framework. And good evening to all the participants and my fellow presenters and My dear brother Sello there, I appreciate, good to see you. It happens within a historical and current context. The historical being the last, I want to focus on the last 15 years, because this being 30 years, I think 15 years is a fair amount to look into. And it occurs within the current, which is the massive geopolitical world. So effectively, I think if you look at it from both those contexts, no one can deny that the touch points of President Ramaphosa were correct in terms of the picture he sought to paint, which is a picture of inclusive growth. No one can deny that. It's a picture of a capable and competent state. No one can deny it. A picture of saying that you want a state that upholds its own sovereignty. These things are important. And ultimately a picture of, in effect, a number of key aspects such as the ideals of what a decent education is like, a safe society, and all of those things. All of that is an important pronouncement from the president. My immediate impression was that it would have been ideally served at the inauguration or the opening of Parliament, because the reality is, what do you move from the ideal picture you want to see as a nation and as a country is that the purpose of the State of the Nation address is to in fact articulate a plan that is built on something. And the first building block is the policy pronouncements that the president made. I have always held a view that without a national dialogue, we as South Africans are operating with priorities, but that are not coherent around what are we in fact trying to solve for at a macro level. The last time we did this exercise was on the National Development Plan. And when you look at the National Development Plan, on average, across all departments, the average achievement is less than 50% of the objectives stipulated in the National Development Plan, which means if you were looking at aspects such as, for example, expenditure on infrastructure, that sits at close to about 5.4%. If you were to look at aspects on educational outcomes and, sorry, excuse me, healthcare outcomes and some of the objectives that are there, we're sitting at close to 40% or so. So in reality, the objectives behind the National Development Plan highlighted the fact that you want to get to GDP growth of at least close to about 5%. We're not going to achieve that, and unemployment levels remain high. So on the first instance is that the picture relative to the National Development Plan tells of a vast chasm between goals and objectives that we wanted to achieve. On the second is that underpinning all of that are a number of policy issues that needed to be attended to, and of which one of them I want to highlight is the review of the white paper on local government. Now, that white paper on local government has been an ongoing discussion that started a long time ago. And I think that, for example, we've missed being able to achieve that, and it's had profound consequences. Now, today, municipalities are underfunded, and the net consequence of those municipalities is such that you've got these water losses, etc. The third is about the plan. To me, I think that's what I would have loved to hear more from the president. Because frankly, seeking to achieve a 3% growth plan is an underachievement, given the fact that even if you were to hit 3%, you are not doing a significant dent on unemployment. Secondly, if you want to build a capable state, we need graduates who are sitting on this platform to come and work for the state. Now, South Africa, in terms of higher education participation of citizens, sits at between 10 to 12%. That number for Africans is relatively low, which means that actually the skills pipeline going into higher education or going into public service becomes profoundly low. That is a genuine concern if you want to build a capable state. And I would say it must be true equally so for politicians. The third dynamic that I find is going to be a house built on sand that's difficult is the fact that you've got a foundation of a fiscal foundation that is weak. Of the R1 that is spent, that comes into the South African fiscus, 22 cents of it is spent on debt, 60 cents of it is spent on the social wage, and the balance is on public service. So effectively, you've got no money to spend. So the president makes a pronouncement of over R1 trillion, of which 900 odd billion rands is on infrastructure growth and 20 billion rands is on the transformation fund. In all reality, much of that cannot be attained given the fiscal constraints that we've got, a currency that's facing profound pressure, and ultimately a borrowing context upon which the state needs to recruit more. So to me, I think what we've got to do is actually reduce the State of the Nation address to what it is meant to be, which is an articulation of priorities for that year. So the things that I look at here, and I made some notes here to say, what can we expect for next year when it comes to the president's promises, so that we don't run the risk of having more of the same, is that government must finalize the Whistleblower Protection Act. That we've got to look to. Secondly, 4,000 officers must be added to the detective service. Thirdly, the National Water Resource Infrastructure Agencies to be included within a year. PRASA to restore signaling system within the next 5 years. 10,000 students will be supported under phase 1 of the new funding model this year, and the National Health Insurance preparatory work must be done in 2025. So if you want to ask me what are the things that are in the State of the Nation address, those are them, because those are the things I can wake up next year and ask the president whether they did achieve them or not. At this point in time, grand promises, policy reforms, an absence of a plan which doesn't delineate what the priorities are means that in fact we've got no benchmarking to do. So I would urge that we focus on what the president has pronounced for the year, and let's see how much of it gets achieved. That is my reflections on State of the Nation. And I think if I was going about it myself, I would have taken a vastly different stance and began at, here are the tangible things we're going to do in this year, emanating for that big picture of a 5% growth, an increase in the pass mark, a focus on what we do around crime, here then the priority, because once you've got your priorities, you can even cut things like wasteful expenditure, you can eradicate corruption, and you can improve your pass mark, because that tells you that this is a country that's going to achieve a number of things in a year, rather than, in fact, let's paint a rosy picture year on year and tell people what we hope to achieve rather than the tangibles of what we are going to achieve. Thank you so much, moderator. You are on mute. I think one of the things we must do as SONA is do a Zoom workshop, a Teams workshop.
Colleagues, I apologize. I've had to join in with multiple devices. It's got to do with the sun. But thank you very much on your reflections, Mr. Naimani. I think one of the things that came out as you were speaking, excuse me, was just the reflection on your ability to contextualize the SONA, placing it both in a historic and in a current context, but also in the greater occurrences of the geopolitics that are currently under play. I also appreciate how you were able to bring it back home and say these were the priorities, because that was going to be my follow-up question to you, that what then should have been the priorities of the president moving forward with the 2025 SONA. I would like to remind our audience at this juncture that you can please send your questions into the chat box, and then we're going to start another round of reflections just from the inputs that our speakers shared. And I will start with Ms. Minister, the Deputy Minister once more. Mr. Maimani, you can have your camera off so that you can. Yes, so to Mr. Sitlolo, just a question. I see there's a question here in the chat box. And Tepo says that, South Africa faces a significant water scarcity issue due to a combination of factors like climate change, population growth, poor water management, and some other issues include droughts, water pollution, inefficiency in water management. So how does the National Department address these challenges, and what will be required to better the lives of South African citizens, particularly at a local sphere?
Yeah. Naledi, I think what's important for South Africans to, and thank you for the question. What's important for South Africans to take note of is that the National Department of Water and Sanitation has got a regulatory management function. Municipalities at a local level have got an implementation, as it were, reticulation of water and sanitation in services, operations and maintenance of water and sanitation infrastructure, and so forth and so on. So, of course, we face now a huge challenge in as far as those services are concerned. The issue of climate change, of course, we know that as I've highlighted the issue of water pollution, we've spoken about the issue of climate change. The issue of drought. We know that we've got a framework on how to address those issues because we've got lessons from the city of Cape Town on how they were able to deal with their own challenges of drought in terms of tackling day zero. Now, to address a number of these issues so that we may be able to secure the resource and be able to also then address some of the issues that the question highlights. We can look at one, legislative reforms. We've made amendments to the National Water Act as well as the Water Services Act. But South Africans have to generally understand that most of the issues that they obviously complain about when it comes to water, those are actually issues that are a municipal function and not necessarily a National Department of Water and Sanitation function. But be that as it may, we have to find a way in which we can reform our legislation or amend existing legislation in order for us to be able to have greater intervention powers in municipalities where they fail. You'd recall that the National Department of Water and Sanitation undertakes what we call drop reports. That is the blue drop reports that looks at the quality of our water, the green drop report that looks at the wastewater infrastructure, and the no drop report that looks at the amount, of course, of water that is being lost across the country by various municipalities. And all of these particular reports have come out painting a very bleak picture in as far as the water and sanitation infrastructure is concerned, the amount of water that we are losing is concerned. Currently, the Water Services Act does not make provision for the separation between a water services authority and a water services provider. So a municipality can both be a water services authority as well as a water services provider. Using the drop reports, what we are what we want to actually achieve with the amendments that we have made in the Water Services Act that is currently with the State Law Advisor is to provide for a separation between a water services authority as well as a water services provider. I'll make you an example. Currently, there is a ministerial intervention in the municipality of Mfuleni in Gauteng, where Rand Water has effectively taken over the running of the water and sanitation services in that municipality simply because the municipality has failed. They've come up with also a concept that we are awaiting National Treasury approval that is called the special purpose vehicle. That is to say, where a municipality has failed in terms of the analysis that has been done in terms of the drop reports, that municipality as a water services authority must appoint a licensed water services provider that will be able to come in and be able to take over the operation and maintenance or the running of the water services function of that municipality. Currently, that is not what is happening. And of course, this collapse is exacerbating the current crisis that we're having in terms of water and sanitation services across municipalities. And I also wanted to touch, Mr. Maimane, of course, spoke about the review of the white paper on local government. That as far as I can remember, even at varsity, this has been a almost sort of like a swan song, as it were, and yet it has not happened, despite the fact that the year on year the AG gives us outrageous outcomes in as far as the state of municipalities is concerned. So that has not actually happened. Municipalities have just been left to be the spoiled child that they are, simply because where they fail, there are a number of interventions in the Constitution, whether it's 139, 154, where they need to be supported and they are given funds. But in terms of their spending patterns, we know that municipalities are incapable, a lot of them are incapable of spending the funds that they get in order to be able to actually build infrastructure, refurbish infrastructure, and really give rather ring-fence whatever they receive in terms of revenue of water and sanitation, and ring-fence that for operation and maintenance of the water and sanitation infrastructure. So all of these things, and I know that we want to talk at a high level, at a national level, but I'm more interested, to be quite honest with you, at what the impact is. We've almost sort of like forgotten the developmental mandate of local government and what it does in terms of job creation, and what it does in terms of fighting inequality, and what it does in terms of reducing poverty. Because at the end of the day, that is where small, medium enterprises thrive, and they are the backbone of the economy at a local level. Tuck shops and whatever other businesses are there. So for me, that is just how I can probably address that particular issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister. To say, I don't know, am I still on spotlight so that colleagues can see me, and then they may know that their time is running out. We have another question here. This time it's for Ms. Mohale, and it comes from me. Because you've been in the NYDA for quite some time now, I wonder what would be the advice that the NYDA would give to the president and to the presidency with regards to the kinds of work and interventions that are necessary to develop that youth space in terms of employment, access to resources.
Moderator, I'm not sure if I lost you.
I think, am I still here? I'm having a challenge with my network because of the weather. Am I audible?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, I was asking what would be the advice that you would give to the president in terms of the interventions that are necessary for young people, considering the pending crisis that you reflected on in your initial submission?
Thank you very much for the question. I'm not sure if it's advice to the presidency. It's really what is it that we can be able to do collectively. I mean, the president has been speaking for the past few years around a social compact where you bring government, civil society, the private sector together to be able to try and resolve the pervasive challenges that not only young people face, but society as a whole. But I think some of the key interventions that we're able to look at is how we're able to protect what we call infant economies. I mean, I can't remember who was the minister. I mean, there was a conversation that once took off in South Africa around how we protect infant economies. And you also speak about local economies and township economies. And this came in when you had these big corporates going into our local economies, or what we call townships, to set up, whether it's malls, it's to set up these big spaza shops that our local business people cannot be able to compete with. And that is an important factor, because if we want to grow the economy that is for the people, by the people, we need to be able to ensure that we enact policies that protect their participation in those economies. So if there's a Pick n Pay that is opened in my economy, in my immediate locality, you must know that the woman in the streets who usually sells tomatoes, or who usually sells different vegetables, her business is going to close down because she has no way to be able to compete with the likes of Pick n Pay. So we need to be able to think about how do we protect infant economies, but also how do we protect our people who are predominantly in the informal economy? How do we support them? Because some of the interventions and a lot of the interventions that government proposes in as so far as protecting these local economies only looks at those that are formalized. We have never really had an intensive discussion as to how we're able to financially support those that are in the informal economy, and also maybe have a conversation about whether there is a need for people in the informal economy to formalize in order for us to be able to assist them and support them to be able to grow their businesses. But also there is a trending concept called the gig economy, and the gig economy has always existed for a very long time, and this speaks to predominantly those that are in the arts. So artists are considered to be in the gig economy, who rely really on what we call gigs. You know, we need to be able to say what cushion can we be able to give them to support their growth and future prospects so that they're able to create sustainable income, not only for themselves, but also for their families. We also need to be able to look at how we channel young people into emerging markets. I mean, if you look at the State of the Nation address, I mean, there was one line that spoke about TVET colleges, and I read a statement from the Deputy Minister that he would be wearing a work suit. I think it's from one of the colleges, you know, as a form of raising awareness around the importance of investing in vocational, you know, institutions, those TVET colleges, that we need to be able to build a layer of young people who are going into these vocational institutions that can be able to get practical skills that can help them to create employment, as well, of course, to be absorbed in different sectors of the economy, but also to be able to look into how do we start having an agile you know, curriculum and an agile education and skills training system that matches itself to the needs of the economy. So if you are creating these skills or empowering young people, training them in institutions of higher learning, are we responding to the needs of the economy? We need to be able to lead a demand-led economy so that we're able to produce young people that can be easily absorbed in the economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mohale. I apologize for that. There's a thunderstorm here and it's quite something to witness. The next questions are for Mr. Maimane, and I would like to apologize to the audience because Mr. Maimane, I believe you are leaving us at 7.
Yeah.
Yes. So the last few.
My apologies. Yeah.
Sorry about that. I'm going to ask that Mr. Maimane gives us the response to his questions and his parting shots thereafter, and then we will continue on with our debate. I wonder, sir, if you've been able to see the questions on the chat, or should I read them out to you?
Some were sent to me by Prof. I can see them here, and so the first one was, what was the barometer we used to measure performance? So what government's first objective is meant to do is that post a national development plan, it must be able to take annual performance plans, and those then are the basis upon which we design programs, and funding follows likewise. So at this point in time, you can go to any department and do what the performance is relative to what the spend is, and where the National Development Plan objectives that were set to mature in 2030 look like, and you'll appreciate that it is aggregating at less, and 40–45% is often generous. Some departments perform woefully below that. So that's the barometer we use. And through the Parliamentary Budget Office, we do an extensive amount of work looking at whether budgets have been spent properly. The second question to me was, based on key issues that you raised, are you going to join the GNU so most of these issues can be resolved? I think the best way, and I've communicated this to the president, I can serve the country at this point in time, would be to ultimately do the work of accountability. 70% of parliament is GNU parties. So if opposition is only left up to MK, EFF, you lose that centrist, democratic centrist voice. So first of all, I think we exist to give that alternative to South Africans. Thirdly, it's this idea that as you chair the Appropriations Committee, I find my role an important one, not having to be in the GNU, because I can sober up the facts. I'm not trying to protect the interests of the government. I'm trying to protect the interests of all South Africans. So when I view the budget, I don't just accept what the executive says. We simply come at it with a view of saying, how best can we safeguard the resources of the people and look at where we go. So I think Yes, I agree. Many of the issues can be solved within the GNU. Of course, I think I wish it well. I wish any government well because it's in the interest of all South Africans. But I certainly think that without a coherent plan, part of the frustration that would make it hard for us to join is because sometimes I think it would be like climbing on a bus, not knowing where the bus is going, what the bus seeks to achieve, and then saying, at least I've got a seat in the bus. And so you end up with policy discussions that are endless. You debate NHI, you end up debating NHI, you end up debating expropriation, because in all fairness, none of these issues were discussed before. So had they been, one of the things that I'd advance for future, for the purposes of our democracy, is that we need to spend longer time than 12 days. That would mean an amendment to the Constitution, negotiating coalitions. Because at this point in time, we negotiate in less than 12 days, we create these arrangements, and they don't last. Municipalities teach us that. GNU is 7 months, and the other partners are taking the other partners to court. I don't wish them to fail. I'm just merely alluding to the fact that these are issues that in a typical negotiated framework would have been ironed out before, so that we are working off the same plan. I wouldn't want to be a part of a situation where we end up just literally regurgitating or arguing about things we could have settled before. Question, these reflections from Sona could also be linked to the impasse and the ruling of the ICC in The Hague last year. Israel was found guilty after initiative of the SA government. This has been heralded as a huge achievement towards attaining peace. The total after losing all of that. What are your views, since the principle, as Bossa is talking about Ubuntu and is crucial? Nothing also says that you once visited Israel as a rep from the DA. Let me start backwards forwards. Firstly, I've visited both Israel and Palestine. I've engaged both sides of the argument. I think the global community would agree on a two-state solution, a ceasefire in this regard. I think that's important. Foreign policy as it sits isn't always a choice between right and wrong. It's a choice sometimes between worse and much worse. So on the ICJ case, look, South Africa took its own principled view. One of the things that are important to note is the fact that I think justice as a framework is an important dynamic, and I think that let the ICJ makes its own ruling and continue from that. I have to look at it from a funding point of view and ask that it should have been part of a collective effort by countries who share a common view to prosecute the ICJ case. For two reasons. One, the first one being funding. I think we are clear about the fact that we had to pass a special appropriation to fund the ICJ case. And in all reality, South Africa can't afford it at this space, given the economic picture I showed you earlier on. But also, I think the collective voice would have been helpful so that you don't become selective or selected when it comes to direct engagement with countries like the US, etc. On the impasse issue, I do think this needed to be a broader global conversation. I think South Africa, we form part of the global community, and in the same way as we engaged Russia-Ukraine conflict, we went as a collective of African leaders. Why was this not the case when it came to the ICJ case? I think it would have been helpful in this regard. So the impasse is that. So when you say we will not be bullied or not, I want to make my views particularly clear in this regard, because I think you can make the mistake of thinking, there are two conversations taking place. There are those that say, the US must go jump. They are not going to tell us what to do. We uphold sovereignty. And I hear that argument. It's an important argument. Every country must uphold its own sovereignty. Then there are others who say, no. You can't just dismiss the US, but we must deal with the AfriForums, etc., of this world. My stance simply is this, is that both have got some semblance of truth, but not the complete truth. We have to define our shared interests as South Africa. We have to present those to the international community, of which the US is one of them. You cannot wish away the US as a trading partner, not only for conversations around PEPFAR, but on AGOA. And equally so, you cannot wish away your own sovereignty as a country, particularly when it comes to issues of your domestic priorities, such as expropriation. Because frankly, on this issue, there's no government in the world that hasn't got an expropriation law. What we've got to legislate for is for this generation and future generations. So these things become important in making sure that you preserve that, but it works with your global objectives. Now, if your objective is to expropriate land for building an airport, I think everybody could agree with that. But because of historical practice, people have seen the danger of expropriation being used for personal benefit at the expense of the majority of citizens, and that can be a challenge. So I do think what we've got to do now is lead with domestic and international priorities as a country. And I don't think we've been able to communicate those and put them forward. I'm just trying to make sure I cover the questions that are put towards me. Oh, there's a question about TVET colleges, etc. Look, firstly, and it says here, this year only we have more than 100K people who do not have space in tertiary institutions. So does this accommodate people in order to respond to SDG 4 and NDG 2030? Look, the throughput on TVET colleges is relatively low. I think we could do better in this regard. But I think as South Africans, we need to sober ourselves up in not believing that everybody must go to university. Everybody must be able to go to university. That's why I fight so hard to eradicate this thing of passing a subject at 30%. But it doesn't mean after everybody's got a bachelor's pass, as is the case in 98%, or well, a high percentage in the IEB sector relative to the National Senior Certificate, that everybody must go to university. I think TVET colleges and vocational training is key, a part of that. Where the difficulties are is that we often fail to capacitate those, give the best resources there, and proper funding in this regard. I certainly endorse the view of where TVET colleges must go and assisting them in this regard and making sure that they produce the sort of vocational training that we need. I think those were all the questions that are put towards me. And in this regard, to me, look, my reflections on this issue are, I guess if you heard me say one drum tonight, it's this. If you were to track the early 90s, 98, or at least 94 was RDP. After that, we had GEAR, which had its own enemies. And then we had ASGISA. And then we moved on to NGP. And then emanating from NGP, we had a bit of a hiatus. And then we developed the NDP. Since then, we've never created a workable social compact that we can emanate from. If you went to Kenya, the Kenyans tell you about Kenya 2030. And that's the song upon which every minister sings. If you don't have a coherent plan that you can organize society around, how do you build institutions to safeguard that plan? I can tell you today, people tell me we must fight corruption. I say, good luck. The SIU is operating at 48% capacity. I can't see how the SIU is going to investigate other crimes that take too long. The courts are already clogged up for 4 years. So if you wanted to go prosecute a matter at the Joburg High Court, your first court date is 2029, thanks to the Road Accident Fund. So on matters like climate change, do you have the institutional capacity to respond to this issue? Therefore, we've got to really come back to saying to ourselves, how do we build a society upon which we are clear on our goals, but we are also able to articulate the institutional capacity to take us forward in this regard? So to me, the sooner we create South Africa 2035 or South Africa, whatever, then we can begin to say, let's harness all the resources of society. Many of the professionals on this call today, if I said to you, come serve, you legitimately can ask me, but where? You know, the president talks about the capacitation of the Public Service Commission to make appointments. And I'm going, great, But if I know what the objectives are, if I said Eskom must drive the renewable agenda, the splitting of Eskom into 3 entities, and I see the president introduce more privatization through introducing other providers in that space. Well, the CEO of Eskom in its appointment now has a different composition to just simply say, let us get the best person to run an institution that uses 70% of its energy from coal, as an example. If you said rail and transport, so for me, I think transport-led infrastructural growth is critical. That's the future of this country. So what I would look at is anyone who is able to get me a rail connection between Northwest, Bloemfontein, and Mpumalanga, so that you can enhance tourism and the movement of goods across all 3 of those things. If you were to do that, then I would have a director general within transport who would look at the matter differently. So to me, I think in the absence of having this sort of organizing framework, social compact, an organizing vision, I think South Africa will continue to announce more and more plans. And to quote Stephen Groote said something to me that was really, I close with this thought. He closes his article in the Daily Maverick by mentioning that perhaps there are some fundamentals that we don't have, and we are to assess year on year whether the president has achieved what the president wants to achieve. You discover not. But then he says this, this does solve one problem for President Ramaphosa, though. He can repeat the promises next year. My worry is, I've been a member of parliament for long enough. The last thing we need is a repetition of more and more promises. What the state of the nation must be is a moment to account, to say, last year I said we would digitize. This is how far we've gone. This is where we are. Because when you set that culture, every department, when it comes to its own budget votes or its BRRR processes, it can arrive and say, here's what we said we would do. Here's how we account. And then as a nation, whether you are in the public or the private sector, you can say, actually, for us as a business, we are going to invest here in PPPs because we can see that is a priority for government this year. In the absence of a plan, truly, as the Bible says, people perish for lack of a vision. And when you don't have a clear, coherent vision, people don't know how to serve in that regard. Moderator, I thank you, and I truly apologize for having to run. I did say that earlier. Unless there's a pressing question I could really take now, but other than that, I think if you can release me, I will be most gracious.
Thank you so much, Mr. Maimane. I just wanted to say, as a takeaway from your final reflections, that insistence on a coherent social plan is so important that we can build our society around, in particular now, when we are facing so many challenges of social cohesion, racism, xenophobia, and the underlying socio-economic challenges that are bubbling under. Thank you, Mr. Maimane, for your reflections this evening. You are released, and we will continue with our conversation with colleagues that are staying on the call. I've noticed in the chat, Deputy Minister, that there have been a number of questions that have been posed to you. So I think maybe you can just continue on with those reflections as you have begun on the chat.
Yeah, I'd really tried, but I'm also juggling gadgets because there are WhatsApp groups that I need to respond to and things like that. So you will excuse me for that. All right, I see. Just want to check here. Sfiso M says the recent drought that severely impacted several inland provinces has had devastating effects on rural livestock farmers, particularly in northern Limpopo. Many areas only began receiving rain late November and early December, leaving communal grazing lands patched and water resources depleted. As a result, numerous small-scale and communal farmers have suffered significant livestock losses, rendering their animal unfit for market and forcing them out of the supply chain. Very unfortunate indeed. This crisis has exacerbated economic disparities as commercial farmers or farms with reliable water access have continued to thrive, while rural farmers who rely on communal grazing lands have struggled. The lack of adequate water infrastructure in communal grazing camps has further worsened the situation, highlighting long-standing neglect in water resource management for rural agricultural communities. Given the critical role that communal grazing lands play in sustaining rural livelihoods, are there any plans from the Department of Water and Sanitation in collaboration with the Department of Agriculture to rehabilitate these areas and improve water management infrastructure? Addressing this issue is vital for ensuring the resilience of rural farmers, supporting food security, and promoting equitable access to resources. And of course, rural areas should have their own economy. I don't know why this thing is now moving, which should be safeguarded. It's a very important question. Somebody is vibing now. We also want to join. Oh, it's costly. Hey.
Prof, are you able to mute that audience member? Thank you. You may continue, DM.
Yeah, this is a very important issue. And colleagues, I want to say this, and I say this with the greatest appreciation to the Constitution that we have, which of course gives us different mandates as the three spheres of government. The issue that you raise here, Sfiso, quite correctly, firstly, national departments have to come together in order to be able to address issues such as this, as you've correctly highlighted, the Department of Agriculture. You might add land reform and rural development in that. But think of it this way, Sfiso. A lot of infrastructure that is built by the Department of Water and Sanitation, we do so on the basis of municipalities and provinces that really pitch these challenges to the departments or to the various departments. If you don't have a municipality that has an appreciation of challenges such as these, a province that is able to support such municipalities in order for proposals to be drafted and for budgets to be sought at a national level, we'll never be able to address these major infrastructure issues so that we may be able to have a sustainable local economy. So the Department of Agriculture definitely has a role to play. And we also need to be able to then look at what the municipality is doing by themselves. Municipalities that are water services authorities, except metro municipalities, qualify for two grants at the National Department of Water: the Regional Bulk Infrastructure Grant, which we refer to as RBIC, and the Water Services Infrastructure Grant that we refer to as WISIC. We need to look at whether municipalities are able to leverage on those grants, and as and when they do, whether they're able to actually get the best out of those grants by building infrastructure, by making sure that they're able to extend their network and so forth and so on. So these are some of the things that I think are fundamentally important, because we can build the infrastructure as the national department, but then from the infrastructure that we have built, for a dam, for example, the pipeline that has to now come in, the infrastructure in terms of a water treatment plant, for example, once it goes to reservoirs, the reticulation, that particular value chain there becomes the responsibility of the municipality. Now, I said very honestly in one of my responses, and I said, how do we then address this issue? I said, well, let's amend Section 27 of the Constitution. Let's take away the mandate of local government in as far as water services is concerned, and give it to the national department. Because then you can hold us fully accountable for not building infrastructure, for not building an increasing network for connectivity, and so forth and so on. The other issue that was raised somewhere, and I read one of the questions that speaks about the increase in terms of water losses. In Gauteng, we're looking at about 2.1 billion liters of water that is lost. And I think the person that wrote it there said that rainwater is failing. No. We must also be able to appreciate the separation between the city of Johannesburg, for example, and rainwater. Rainwater extracts water from the water resource, like Vaal River, for example, treats it to potable standard, and then obviously provides it in bulk to the metro municipality of Johannesburg, city of Tshwane, and others that are dependent on rainwater as a provider. What happens to that water becomes the responsibility of those municipalities. So rainwater in their system, in their network, have got losses, but they're not that astronomical. Municipalities are losing astronomical amounts of water. These are billions of rands that are being lost to the ground, are being lost because of collapsing infrastructure or collapsed infrastructure and illegal connections. The other element that I need to add in there is municipalities' ability to implement bylaws. And I'll take it back to pollution, for example. If you go to the Hanops River and you look at where informal settlements have mushroomed, they're on the riverbanks. Where does their waste go? It goes into the water resource. It goes into the river. That is why we've got the crisis that we have. Although, of course, a huge amount of pollution of our water resources is largely due to dysfunctional wastewater treatment works. Sure, there's okay, I missed it. My phone is moving. I have no idea why it's moving so fast.
Indeed, you have a lot of questions. Can I just ask that we give Ms. Mohale a chance to respond to some of the questions that she has while you look over your questions? And Ms. Mohale, after you've given your reflections, may you also give us your parting shot, and then we will close with the Deputy Minister of Water. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity just to respond to some of the questions. I think one of the questions that actually came through that I was able to get from Prof. I think my laptop is also just giving me a bit of a problem. The first one was around how we're able to measure the success of the programs of the National Youth Development Agency. You would know that the NYDA is audited by the AG on an annual basis. And as part of our key performance indicators, we're able to track in as so far as the work that we do, what is it that we're supposed to be doing, to what extent. And of course, if we're able to reach our key performance indicators, of course, the AG would give us a nod that this is indeed the work that we have done. But secondary to that, beyond us, doing the work that we're supposed to do, and of course, reaching our key performance indicators, is about the monitoring and evaluation of the programs that we have. And I must be able to put on record that it's always very difficult to measure impact, especially in the long term. In the short term, it's always easy because you're able to provide a scientific analysis in as so far as to what an income, for example, may be able to do for a family once they are in the programs of the NYDA. Programs of the NYDA are in the short term. So if you are in our National Youth Service program, you'd know that you're in the program for just a year. So in that year, we're able to deduce the type of economic impact an injection of income would have in a family and within a community. But in as so far as the long term is concerned, it's always quite difficult because once you lose a person that is within the system, it's always quite difficult to locate them and therefore have this extensive study around how the input you would have made in their life or the investment that you would have made in their life would have carried them through in the long term. The second question would have been around the steps that we're taking to improve the tracking of employment outcomes. One of the strategies that we would have been able to employ, and this is also embedded in our KPIs as the NYDA, is to be able to say, for example, when you are funding a young person and you are giving them seed capital to be able to grow their business, one of the requirements is that they should be able to employ 1 or 2 other young people within the business. But what we also have done is, as we try to digitize our systems as the NYDA, we're able to retain some of their information and track them, well, albeit over a short period of time, to be able to check, from the seed capital that we would have given you, how many other jobs were you able to produce to create within your immediate company. But also the good thing is that for as long as you are under the age of 35, you are able to receive other services within the NYDA, and that is what makes it very easier for us to be able to just monitor in as so far as the employment creation process is concerned with the young people that are within the system. Those that are not within the system, we usually rely on Statistics SA to be able to give us an expanded view of the status of young people, their predisposition, what are the challenges that they are facing, and of course the statistics around the levels of unemployment, those that are neither in education, employment, or training. So all of that information in the main is received from Statistics South Africa, because unfortunately we do not have capacity to be able to have a broad study or broad monitoring and evaluation framework that can be able to encompass even those young people that are not within our system. But I think in as far as my parting short is concerned, with regards to the conversation that we've been having today, I think the biggest priority for me is really how do we reimagine the South African economy. And I think the tagline for this year's State of the Nation address was a nation that works for all. And I think for me, it's really about how do we reimagine the South African economy that can be able to work for everybody, but most importantly, understanding the predisposition of Black people, their marginalization, and us being able to say, if you are able to understand what generational wealth does for people, you can also be able to understand what generational poverty does for people. So if I'm born and bred in wealth, it's very difficult for me to wake up and I'm living in abject poverty. It's the same thing with Black people who are in peripheral areas of economic activity, who are living in squalor and are living in high levels of unemployment. And of course, as you would have noted now, we are going into a period where there are people in South Africa that are in abject starvation. We need to be able to say, how do we reimagine this economy so that when we're saying it must work for all, we have put those who were previously marginalized at the center of the work that we do, so that we can be rapid in our response to breaking generational poverty within our communities, and not having young people, not having citizens going into the future with the burden of having to alleviate all other people within their immediate surroundings from the scourge of poverty. Government needs to be able to put some level of impetus towards resolving the socio-economic conditions that the most marginalized people of South Africa are facing. And I think some of the interventions that have been put in place are quite progressive, but I think we need to be able to match the crisis, the response to the crisis that we are facing in South Africa. Thank you.
Unmuted. Thank you very much, Ms. Mohale. Your parting shot is really something to take home. I think you've introduced to me a new concept I never really thought of, or you've flipped the coin when you talk about, if we can understand what generational wealth is, can we also understand what generational poverty is? And that is such an important point, especially when we think about, as young people, as academics, and as practitioners, how are we going to reimagine South Africa's economy? Thank you very much. Let me give Mr. Sitlolo the last 5 minutes to either reflect on the questions that he still has on the chat, or to give us, his parting shot. 5 minutes, sir.
All right. Thank you so much, Naledi. And yeah, I'm appreciative also of Karabo's understanding of these issues of young people, and I'm also appreciative of her inputs. So thank you very much for that. I just want to highlight something in relation to the Giyani water scheme. One thing that has really taken away the dignity of South Africans in this country is corruption. The Giyani Water Project is a classic case of what happens when vouchers gather and they just want to eat. The Department of Water and Sanitation has hundreds of projects, some that were started as far back as 15 years ago, 2010, 2011, have never been completed, were at 20%, 30% when they were left, or when they were abandoned rather. This is something that has really set us back from an infrastructure point of view as a country, particularly water infrastructure. So that's the first thing that I think we need to have an appreciation for. People have really fundamentally lost their moral compass. They've decided that they're going to enrich themselves and to hell with everybody else. The second thing is we need to really start having a conversation about our understanding of the various functions of the spheres of government. Once we understand what National Department of Water does in relation to what local municipalities do in the space of water and sanitation, we will be able to attribute the failures to the right sphere. But of course, the buck must stop with us. That is why we even go as far as even intervening where municipalities are failing. The third thing is civic education is fundamentally important in our country. If South Africans don't know how to behave in and around water, sanitation, if South Africans do not know how to address issues of criminality, we've got a problem. Mr. Maimane spoke about increasing the capacity of SAPs. There are three things that will make us successful as a country: the rule of law, good governance, and safety. If these three things are missing, then we've got a problem. Safety is missing in our country. That's why we've got mafias for everything. We've got construction mafias, we've got sewer mafias, we've got transformer mafias, we've got water tanker mafias. Everything is just mafia. It's like we're in a mafia state. And these are the things that hamper our development and growth as a country. And these are the realities that, unfortunately, we must talk about them. And a lot of them happen at a local level. In the history of Section 139 interventions, there is no record of success. None exists. These are the sad realities and challenges that we have to deal with on a daily basis, because we need to sing the same swan song in as far as but the municipality, and so forth and so on. So we are unlocking a number of projects that were abandoned. We're prioritizing them as the national department. That is why we're working on obviously the finalization of the National Water Resource Infrastructure Agency, which will see obviously the collapse of TCTA into that, so that we can be able to go to the markets and make sure that we're able to leverage on those water infrastructure investments. We don't have a shortage of skills in South Africa, and I think that was one of the questions, that we don't. Water scientists, engineers, we don't. The problem is nobody wants to work in an environment where there is thriving corruption, mismanagement, wasteful expenditure, and so forth and so on. That's why even when I was in Saudi last year, I met engineers from Limpopo who were doing, you know, the sound design and lighting of where we were. That's a big problem. But I want to appreciate the fact that we are able to have platforms like this, and you know, we should continue to have platforms like this, because they give us an opportunity to really learn from others as well. Because I'm not an expert in water and sanitation, but I'm learning every day and I'm able to contribute positively. So I want to thank everybody. I want to thank yourself, Prof, as well as those that have asked me questions. I don't know, Prof has got my number. I'm sure you can put it there. Some of the questions can come through an email. I'll endeavor to answer all of them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister. I didn't want to interrupt you, but we do have 4 minutes left in the meeting. And I would also like to take this opportunity to thank our speakers, Mr. Mmusi Maimane in his absence, Mr. Sililo Sitolo, and Ms. Karabo Mohale for their inputs, reflections, and submissions for this reflection. I'd also like to encourage colleagues who are here to please join SAAPAM. They've got a number of activities throughout the year, both academic and I've seen social, and they would love to see you at the SAAPAM conference towards the end of the year. Thank you very much, colleagues, for attending. Prof. Molepo, you will let us know if there are any announcements or questions or anything from SAAPAM. And in that absence, then we can end the meeting. Is there any questions, sir? Any announcements, I meant?
No, from our SAAPAM, we're really thankful, but we also encourage our colleagues to join our association, and we have a conference that is coming up. Make sure that you attend. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. And thank you very much, colleagues, for attending. We have come to the end of our session. Thank you, everyone.